There's, I think, a pair of intuitions which are related that people struggle with. One is, God gave me free will, and He commanded a Torah, so it must be that if I exercise my free will, I can do everything He said. After all, He must have taken into account what I'm able to do, what everybody's able to do. When He gave the mitzvahs of the Torah, so it must be that with my free will, I can do everything He said to do. The second related intuition is, I'm here to serve God. As Luzzatto says, service of God, he broke it up into two parts. Doing mitzvahs is one, and getting necessities to be able to do mitzvahs is the other. All of that is serving God. Sleep could be serving God. Having a job is serving God, because it's getting the necessities that are required to be able to do mitzvahs. But that's all. That's serving God. That's all there is. And a person should be able, using his free will, to simply do only avodah, only service of God. First intuition is dead wrong. And the second intuition, in the way that the person means it, is probably wrong, though if it's understood more carefully, a little more subtlety, then it probably could be okay. The first one is wrong because the way in which God takes into account our free will and our strengths and weaknesses is not by tailoring the mitzvah so we can do all of them, but rather by releasing us from responsibility when we fail, when the mitzvahs are too hard for us. It's another way to take into account. He knows exactly what our strengths and weaknesses are. He sets up a system, but if we fail because we are not strong enough to fulfill it, then He releases us from responsibility. Doesn't have to follow that because He gave us free will, we could do everything. Even Maimonides, if you say these things to somebody who's knowledgeable, he may say, but Maimonides says in Hilchos Tshuva that since we have free will, every one of us could be as righteous as Moses. That may be true ultimately, but it doesn't mean that because you have free will, you can just snap your fingers and be as righteous as Moses, because the same Rambam says in Hilchos Deos, where he's describing the development of character traits, that if a person has a wrong character trait, there's a procedure that he should use to correct it, and the procedure takes time. It doesn't just say, be strong and fix it right away. On the contrary, the procedure includes making a move that's a bad move, moving to a position that's a wrong position, and staying there for a while, and then gradually floating back to the appropriate position. So even the Rambam, who says we could be, and now probably the right thing to say is become as righteous as Moses, doesn't mean that you can just simply snap your fingers and be it right away. It takes time to develop that. So that's as far as the first intuition is concerned. As far as the second intuition is concerned, maybe all of life could be just serving God, but you'll have to have a very broad definition of what counts as necessary. I have mitzvahs to do. What is necessary? What must I have to do that? Well, food, because I don't have food, I won't be able to do it. And sleep, and probably a place to live, and clothes, and medical care, and then a job to pay for all those things, right? Anything more than that? Anything more than that the tradition regards as also necessary for being able to serve God? The answer is yes. And that's the title of the shir tonight, Psychological Needs. The validity of fulfilling psychological needs. The Torah is very broad-minded, so to speak, when it comes to the psychological needs that it holds are necessary to be able to serve God. I want to give you some examples of this, and then discuss with you what the background for it is, what the rationale for it is, and I think that will give us a more balanced picture of what the Torah expects from us in living in the world. There's a Gemara in Ksubas that talks about our responsibilities of charity, of tzedakah. See a poor person, what am I supposed to do? How much must I give him? How much must I take care of him? So the Gemara quotes two psukim, one's positive, one's negative, and it says you must give him everything he needs, but nothing more than he needs. Nothing more than just what he needs. And then the Talmud says, when it says give him what he needs, in some cases that could include a servant and a horse to ride on. And indeed, it testifies that there was a poor person in Hillel's area, who Hillel undertook to provide him with charity, and he hired him a servant and a horse. And when there wasn't a servant available, Hillel served him. Now the natural thought is, a servant and a horse, in Talmudic times, that would be vast luxury. Vast luxury. If the Talmud says when you have the responsibility of charity, you don't go beyond the person's needs, how could the Gemara possibly say that it would be appropriate for the sake of charity to provide a person with a horse and a servant? Could anybody say he really needs a horse and a servant? And the answer the Gemara gives is yes, because this is a person who grew up in a rich household, and then all the money was lost. And without a horse and a servant, he feels deprived. He doesn't feel confident. He doesn't feel comfortable. Feels nervous and anxious. Because of his psychological state, he needs a horse and a servant. And it is permissible to spend tzedakah money, charity money, in providing such a person with a horse and a servant. Second example, Gemara Shabbos is talking about the appropriateness or inappropriateness of having an operation on the face, a cosmetic operation on the face. Especially for a man, because anything cosmetic typically is considered to be feminine, and men are not allowed to do that. But the Gemara says if that blemish on his face causes him pain, then it's okay, and he could perform the operation. Tosfos asks, suppose the only way in which the blemish on his face bothers him is that it embarrasses him. The Gemara says tsar, pain. Does that include embarrassment? Tosfos says, of course. What did you think? Isn't embarrassment pain? Tosfos just said, it's obvious that when it talks about it, pain, embarrassment is included, which means that a person can spend the money, the effort, and the time to save himself embarrassment, just as he could save himself physical pain. The same word covers both categories. Here's a third example. The Rambam wrote an introduction to Pirkei Avos, to the so-called Ethics of the Fathers. The title of it is Shmona Prakim, the 8 chapters, because it's 8 chapters long. And in the 5th chapter, he discusses the Talmudic principle that everything you should do should be for the sake of heaven. And he says, let's imagine a person who does that. All his actions are for the sake of heaven. How would he eat? Well, of course, he would eat food that's helpful. He wouldn't pay attention to how it tastes. He would just eat the food that's going to promote his health. Now, says the Rambam, what would happen if a person lost interest in food? This is not anorexia, as you'll see. It's some kind of other ailment. He lost interest in food and was becoming malnourished. For him, says the Rambam, you'd have to hire a gourmet chef and prepare the most tantalizing, most attractive foods possible, so as to reawaken his interest in food so that he would get adequate nutrition. And then the Rambam goes on, without interim, without any break, and says, there's a cause of depression. One cause of depression is aesthetic deprivation. A person who is surrounded by drab and ugly surroundings can suffer aesthetic deprivation and thereby become depressed. And therefore, the Rambam says, a person should have a steady diet of aesthetic stimulation. The beauties of nature, art, architecture, literature, music. Now, the first thing that's interesting is that the discussion of depression and aesthetics follows right on the heels of physical nutrition. So the Rambam is not making any distinction between the two of them. Both are necessities to which dedicating time and effort and resources is appropriate. And then it goes on and says, you would naturally expect a person who lives up to the principle that all his actions should be for the sake of heaven would not paint golden murals on his walls, nor would he sew golden threads into his clothes. The reader says, of course not, that's just extravagant waste. And then the Rambam says, unless, and the reader says, unless? You mean there could be a time where you would paint golden murals on the walls and sew golden threads into your clothes as part of all your actions being for the sake of heaven? And says the Rambam, yes. If you are a person who needs that to avoid depression, then paint gold on your walls and sew gold into your clothes. So I think you could see that the sources here really mean this. And as you'll see, what I've quoted so far and the ones I'm going to quote, none of them are Hasidic sources. So those of you who are poisoned by current prejudices and think that the Hasidim are softies and more accommodating than other sources in Judaism, none of the sources I'm using are Hasidic sources. Okay, this definitely shows that this idea of two Gemaras and a Rambam is definitely a central idea. What's the explanation for it and how far does it go? There's an essay by one of the Telzer Rosh Yeshivas, this is the Musar movement now. The title of the essay is Pales Magal Raglecha, it's a verse in Psalms, Tehillim, which means make a circle around your feet. He starts the essay quoting a statement from Chazal, that a person who stops Torah study without justification, I mean, it could be temporary for 2 hours, doesn't mean he gives it up and goes off, vacationing in Alaska. He stops Torah study without appropriate justification, is chayiv misa. He incurs the death penalty. Worthy of the death penalty? At God's hands. I'm not talking about a human court. So the author first says, wow, is that literal? Does it really mean that? Maybe it's poetry, maybe it's hyperbole, metaphor. No. He spends a few pages proving that it's absolutely literal and binding. But then he says, in this rule that I just told you, someone who stops learning Torah unnecessarily is worthy of death, there's one word that desperately needs clarification. Which word is that? Unnecessarily. Unnecessarily, sure. If you stop learning Torah with necessity, then you don't incur any penalty. It's only if it's unnecessary. No. So what counts as unnecessary? And then the author says, I'll bet you, the reader, would say, you should define necessity biologically. Must you stop learning Torah to sleep? Sure, because if you don't, you won't be able to learn. Must you stop learning Torah to eat? Sure, because if you don't eat, you won't be able to learn. And must you stop learning Torah to have a job, to pay rent, so you'll live in a house rather than on the street? Sure, because you live on the street, you'll catch diseases and you'll be exhausted and depleted and you won't be able to learn. You'll define necessity biologically, says the author. Well, that's wrong. That's not the appropriate way to define necessity. Necessity is defined psychologically and emotionally. And the author says that a person should feel happy, self-confident, optimistic, joyful, positive. He should manifest Tif'eres Ha'adam, the glory of man. He should walk with mitzadei oz, with steps of strength. That's the condition he should be in. And anything you do in order to get that condition is called a necessary cessation of Torah study. Anything you have to do to feel positive, healthy, strong, optimistic, self-confident, joyful, anything you need to do to feel that way is called a necessary cessation of Torah study. Now, what do you need to feel that way? So the author doesn't leave you to guess. First of all, he gives a list reminiscent of the Rambam. Beauty, nature, relaxed conversation. Not every conversation has to be, what did you learn in the Mishnah? And what did the commentary say? And what did the rabbi say? And how did you understand it? And how do you answer that question? But how are you doing? How are you feeling? What do you hear from home? What are you thinking about doing vacation time? Relaxed conversation. Nature, beauties of nature. And physical pleasure. He mentions that explicitly as one of the things that's necessary to feel happy, joyful, self-confident, optimistic, strong. A certain measure of physical pleasure is necessary, and therefore stopping Torah study to get physical pleasure so as to be able to feel that way is called a necessary cessation of Torah study, and it carries no penalty. Now, all of this is governed by, I'm stopping Torah study to get it because I need it to feel in that way. But of course, one could go too far. One could overdo it. Okay, I've been studying for 3 hours. It's Jerusalem in July, and I remember when North America didn't have any air conditioning. I'm at least 100 years old. So, and you're tired and you're thirsty and so forth and so on, and the thought occurs to you, maybe I should get a Coke. And of course, with your Musar friend sitting, I mean, this is Musar, but it's a different kind of Musar. The Musar friend sitting next to you said, don't give in! Don't give in! Be strong! Conquer it! Yeah, okay, but maybe I won't be able to make it. I'm just not able. So by all means, stop and get a Coke and come back and go back to study. But you don't need 3 Cokes. You don't need 3 Cokes. 1 Coke is enough. 3 Cokes is too much. How do you draw the line? How do you draw the line? To know how much is necessary and how much is beyond what is necessary. So the author considers this. The author says, I'll tell you one way not to try. Imagine a person who says, all right, I hear you. It's valid to fulfill psychological needs, and you do that in order to achieve that high emotional state. But I'm a serious person. I'm not here to fool around. I'm a serious person. I want to do what's right. And I know that there could be occasions in which 1 Coke is justified and 3 Cokes is too much. And I want to know about 2. What about 2? Where do I draw the line? So I have a program. I keep records. How many hours has it been since the last Coke? What has the average temperature and average humidity been since the last Coke? How many hours of sleep have I gotten since the last Coke? What happened with this pattern? Can I do Fourier analysis, dissecting the curves into their mathematical components? Because I want to get it right. So while I'm doing all this analysis, and I'm checking the past, and checking the factors, and so forth and so on, asks the author, how do I feel when I'm doing this? How do I feel? I feel, wow, how did I make a mistake? Who knows? Can I trust my judgment? I better be very, very careful. So I'm feeling worried. I'm feeling self-doubting. I'm feeling insecure. I'm feeling anxious. That wasn't the goal. The goal wasn't to feel like that. The goal was to feel positive, self-confident, happy, optimistic, strong. So, in my effort to find out whether I need the second Coke or not to feel happy, strong, optimistic, joyful, and optimistic, and self-confident, I'm destroying the goal. My effort to find out whether I need it to feel good is making me feel bad. Says the author, under those conditions, don't check, just take it. Just take it. Don't analyze, don't investigate, don't keep records, don't do mathematics and psychology. Just take it. Where did we start? 1 Coke is necessary. 3 Cokes is too much. I don't know about the second Coke. Drink the second Coke and go back to study. Leave it alone. Because the effort to draw the line will make it impossible to achieve the goal. So don't do that. I think you see this is taken very seriously. As I told you, this is a Musar source. A Musar sourse. Whatever prejudices you have about Musar, they're probably about the same. Right? This is a very serious matter. Okay. Now the question is, why? Why is this goal of feeling happy, self-confident, optimistic, strong, and joyful, why is that an appropriate goal? Why does the Torah care about that? Here I have to dispel a very widespread misimpression that Judaism wants you to be happy. Do anything, just be happy. That's the song of the Jewish mother. There must be somewhere in the 630 commandments, commandment, be happy. Well, you check them out. Check them out. Take off a half hour sometime and read through them. It's a good idea in any case. You won't find any commandment to be happy. You'll find that on the holidays, there's a mitzvah to be joyful. You'll find that as an adverb, when you do a mitzvah, Ivdus Hashem b'semcha, you should serve God with joy. But a verb, be happy, as a mitzvah, you're not going to find. You're not going to find. So the author of the essay addresses this. And he says, it is a requirement to have this ideal mental and emotional set because it affects the quality of the mitzvos that you do. It isn't a mitzvah unto itself. It is going to determine the quality of the mitzvos that you do. God not only has a schedule of mitzvos, and what I'm saying now is unjustly controversial, but the requirement that you fill your day with service, as we said at the beginning. But there's a requirement to do mitzvos of high quality. And investing in feeling happy, strong, self-confident, optimistic, and joyful is an investment in the quality of the mitzvos that you will do. Let's take some extreme examples. A person who's anxiety-ridden, he's worried about something that might happen, and he's fearful that if it happens, it's going to crush him, and he's filled with anxiety. So, will he be able to be happy on Shabbos, joyful on Shabbos? And will he be able to study Torah with a clear mind and focus and get the most out of his Torah study? And will he have psychological space for other people? Other people's problems? Other people's needs? People are wrapped up in their own tragedies, wrapped up in their own worries, usually don't have any space for somebody else. So the chesed, the acts of loving kindness in which you reach out to somebody else and try to help him are going to be very difficult. And will he be able to concentrate in prayer through the worry? This is going to affect the quality of his performance of mitzvos across the board. A person who's self-doubting won't have the courage to undertake a mitzvah which he feels he might not be able to succeed in accomplishing because he's a self-doubting person. He doesn't have self-confidence. This ideal emotional state is an investment in the quality of the mitzvahs that you perform. Now, where do we start from? We're talking about stopping Torah study in order to do those activities which will provide the ideal mental state. We're now getting an explanation. You stop Torah study because in that way you'll be able to do certain things. Those things that you do will create the ideal mental state, and that ideal mental state will improve the quality of the mitzvos that you do. That's called a necessary cessation of Torah study. Let me give you what I think is a graphic example of this. A beautiful shot that I heard from my Rabbi Zatzal, Boston Rabbi. Joseph is sold into slavery. Jacob thinks he's died. And Joseph becomes the viceroy in Egypt. Finally, Jacob finds out that his son Joseph is the viceroy in Egypt. There's a famine going on. And he and his family go down to Egypt. And Joseph comes up to meet him. And they meet on the way. And they embrace. And it says, now, commentators are slightly split here, but the majority opinion is that what it says is that Joseph wept on his father's neck, and that's all. Joseph wept on his father's neck. The Torah tells us that Joseph wept and doesn't say anything about Jacob. It means he didn't weep. And the question is, why is that? Why is that? Weeping is something that men do in the Tanakh. One of the many failures of modern civilization, that men can't cry. Certainly can't cry in public. Well, the Tanakh doesn't know anything about that. And men cry without any inhibitions. But for heaven's sake, Joseph knew that Joseph was alive. Jacob thought Joseph was dead. Who is going to experience the greater relief, the greater transition from sadness and tragedy to joy? Surely it's Jacob. Why would it be that Joseph cries and Jacob doesn't cry? So the Talmud has an explanation. The Talmud says, Jacob was saying the Shema. Jacob was saying the Shema. The reader says, wow, what kind of explanation is that? That just makes it worse. Why was he saying the Shema? Even in terms of Torah study and Torah law, there are 3 hours every morning in which you could say the Shema. It means he must have chosen that moment to say the Shema. Why would he do that? How is the Talmud helping me to understand why Jacob didn't cry? So my Rabbi explained as follows. What is the Shema? The Shema, among other things, is where you accept upon yourself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. You declare yourself to be God's servant. You are offering yourself or giving yourself to God. How much do you give? Everything. How much is everything? It depends upon how much you are. If you are more, the everything is more. And if you are less, the everything is less. Now, during those 20 odd years, that Jacob thought Joseph was dead, Jacob did not have an adequate level of joy to experience prophecy. He lost prophecy for 20 years because of his lack of joy. Sometimes I say depression, but then people associate that with clinical depression. That's not what we mean. But it was definitely a loss. Maimonides even holds him responsible for it and says he's guilty for it. But at any rate, he lost it. He lost it for those 20 years. Now, my Rebbe said, during those 20 years, Jacob said the Shema. Said the Shema twice a day. And he offered himself to Kadosh Baruch Hu, all of himself. But he was less of a person during that time. Now he anticipates meeting Joseph, embracing him, and recovering all those powers that he hasn't had for 20 years. And what goes through Jacob's mind is, wow, I'll be able to say a Shema that I haven't said in 20 years. Because now, when I say the Shema and I offer myself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's more of me to offer. So the mitzvah of Shema is a higher quality mitzvah. And that's why he's saying the Shema at that moment. Okay, it's my review, but I think that's an awesome shot. I think it's an awesome shot. It's shot. It makes sense out of the Pasuk. It makes sense out of the Gemara. And it is a central illustration of what we're saying. Your emotional state determines the quality of the mitzvah that you can do. When the essay started with the quote from the Gemara that you mustn't stop studying Torah unnecessarily, necessarily includes investing in the quality of your mitzvahs. And that means that anything you do that enables you to feel happy, strong, self-confident, optimistic, and joyful is a necessary cessation of Torah study. Now, let's go back to the very beginning of the article. So here I am, learning, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm learning. What should I do for the rest of the day? How should I plan the week? What shall I put on the calendar? Well, food, shelter, clothing, and sleep isn't enough. Because if I work merely to have them, and I merely have them, chances are I'm not going to feel self-confident, strong, optimistic, etc. Maybe some people can. Maybe some people can. If they can, then that's all they need. But for the rest of us, that's not enough. Now you go back to the Rambam's list, or the list that he gave, whether it's aesthetics, or whether it's relaxed conversation, or whether it's physical pleasure. So that means, in my list of activities, all of which are service of Hashem, all of which are service, because service is mitzvos and necessities. So the necessities title, can I put doubles tennis? Maybe yes. Maybe yes. We have experience here with people who come at the beginning, and they become very enthusiastic, and they become very dedicated, and they start learning seriously, learning, and after 3 or 4 weeks, they're burned out. They're burned out. They can't open a book. They can't listen to a lecture, and now they become self-doubting. Oh, so I'm not made for it. I'm not good for it. What's the solution? Don't learn so much in the first 4 weeks. I usually ask, did you get any physical exercise? At least 3 times a week. Go out and run, find an indoor pool and swim. Do something. Get out of here. Don't be surrounded by this terribly demanding atmosphere all the time. You can't take it. You can't take it. It's not possible. If you're here for 2 weeks, sachakol, all together, and you're going home, okay, make a grand push, and go home. You're going to be here for 6 months? You have to pace yourself. I ran track, and I ran the 440, which is a quarter of a mile. I also ran cross country, which is 2.5 miles. You can't run them at the same speed. You can't do that. 2.5 miles is 13, 14 minutes of running. The 440 is I forget how many citizens. Anyway, same thing's true. So you have to pace yourself. And just giving yourself a break so you can pace yourself is something which is a necessary cessation of Torah study. So, this means that a person should not feel guilty about these things. A person should, indeed, invest in them. Now, people have prejudices, and the prejudices create blind spots. I'll tell you two incidents that occurred to me, and which early on, which made me sensitive to this tendency. I was a young man learning in Zichron Yaakov, a place where Or Sameach had a branch many years ago, and he tells me he comes from a non-religious background. When a religious boy and girl get married, so then there are customary gifts, and one gift is that the girl's parents give the boy a set of the Talmud. Not today's, they get more than that, a set of the Talmud. Of course, when they got married, they didn't get it. They didn't have a set of the Talmud at home. They were saving up. And got close to the time when they had enough money, and the wife says to the husband, you know, the money we're saving up, I'd like to use it to repaint the apartment, decorate the apartment. So he came to me and he said, I'm saving up for a Talmud. She wants to redecorate the apartment. She wants to repaint the apartment. I mean, tell me, how can I explain to her that a Talmud is more important than repainting the apartment? They had 2 children at this time. I said to him, tell me something. Suppose she told you that she was getting migraine headaches. She went to the doctor. The doctor said, these migraine headaches, you need medicine from Switzerland. And the medicine from Switzerland would use up the money that you've saved for your copy of the Talmud. What would you say? Migraine headaches? Of course, that's a physical condition. Of course, we'd have to spend the money in the medicine. I said, okay, she's at home with your 2 children. She's making a home for you and your children and herself. And she's telling you that living in the apartment the way it is bothers her. It makes her feel depressed. It makes her feel upset. Makes her feel anxious. Why aren't you as concerned with her emotional suffering as you obviously would be for her physical suffering? It's all suffering. As we saw, Tosfos said, tsar. It's all tsar. Similarly, but with a twist, there's a couple living in Bayit Vegan. This was many years ago, and they had 3 children, I think. And the wife complained to me about shopping. Shopping twice a week. Now, today, Baruch Hashem, the country is civilized. You can call up the grocery and give them an order over the phone, and they will bring it to your door. Costs a little more, but you can do that. But such thing didn't exist then. She had to go down 3 flights of stairs with 3 children and go to the Makolet. She said, schlep it all home and take it up bit by bit. And she said, it's hard. It's hard. My husband is learning in Kollel. Is it appropriate for me to ask him to stop learning twice a week and come home for take him an hour, get home and help me and go back, so that I won't have to face this shopping alone? So I said to her, it depends upon what you're going to lose. If at the end of a long day with the shopping and schlepping the children up and down the stairs, if at the end of a day without shopping, when it comes time to go to bed, you climb to bed with a wonderful book and you read 3 chapters, you fall asleep. And on a day in which you have to go shopping alone and schlep up and down the 3 flights of stairs, when you get to bed, you're so exhausted you can only read 2 chapters, then I would say, don't call your husband home. Because to have him stop learning so that you can have 1 more chapter of the book probably isn't worth it. But if on a day in which you have to go shopping alone, and you schlep up and down the stairs with the children and the packages, and when you're finally finished, you're so tired that you feel resentment against your husband, and you're short-tempered with your children, and then you feel guilty for feeling the resentment and being short-tempered, and this downward emotional spiral, then by all means, your husband should come home and help you. This idea of taking emotional needs seriously is not only personal, but it's interpersonal. And you have to sort of remind yourself that this is an important thing. It's not enough just to think of it as an abstract principle. I'm going to give one more piece of advice in this matter, and then we can stop and discuss this. When you get married, typically, maybe some of you are exceptions, But typically, men have a great deal more difficulty in reading other people's moods, feelings, emotions than women do. Well, your wife looks at you, you're an open book. You're an open book. She can read you from one side to the other. You look at her and you see a blank. What? Do I know what she's feeling? Do I know what she's thinking? Do I know what's bothering her and so on and so on? Men typically are clueless, and women, it's an open book. Many women then say, he couldn't be that clueless. It's not possible. How can he be blind? It's written all over my face. To another woman, it's written all over my face. You know, my friends see it right away. If he doesn't see it and he doesn't react, it's because he doesn't care. He doesn't care. He's not interested in me, not interested in how I feel, and that already creates serious rift in the marriage. That creates a serious rift in the marriage. Now, knowing that you have a responsibility for the other person's psychological state and emotional state, a man has to think to himself, what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do about this? Because typically, there's going to be this asymmetry. She'll read me much better than I'll read her. The answer is, you've got to learn to read her. And you show an interest in learning how to read her, which says two things. Number one, because you showed an interest, and I'll tell you how to do it in detail. Because you showed an interest, you aren't disconnected. It does mean something to you. If you show some progress, that means she sees that you really are developing, and that can cut off the feeling of neglect that the woman has, and you might even get better at it. That could also happen. It could happen for some men, that you get better at it. Now, one way to do that is to say to her from time to time, you know, it's important for me to know how you feel. Would you mind if I guessed? I think I see something in you, but I'm not sure. And I might get it wrong. But I want to know. I want to know what you're feeling. I want to be on the same page with you. So would you mind if I guessed? And if I get it right, you could tell me. If I get it wrong, please explain it to me so I'll be able to learn how to understand you and appreciate you better. I think if you say that, it'd be very hard to call you out on that. Very hard to feel that you were inadequate or doing something wrong. And then try it, and put yourself on the line. I can give you very good odds that the first 9 out of 10 you'll get wrong. But next time it'll be 7 out of 10. And next time it'll be 5 out of 10. And gradually you'll come. And even without that, without trying to guess, you could say, tell me, how are you doing? Not the, how are you, honey? Okay, pass the coffee. I'm off, I'm getting a bus in 6 minutes. But how are you feeling? What's going on? Tell me. We have time. I'm sitting here and I'm yours. Tell me how you're feeling, what's going on, what you're thinking about, what your plans are, what you know. A woman wants to know that you're interested in her, that you care about her, that you're thinking about her. And one of the most crucial things is she wants to feel understood. And she will not feel understood if you're out of touch with her emotions. So this is part of taking the emotions seriously. You know very well if your wife had a physical problem, you would take it seriously. You'd be dedicated to it. You'd do everything you could to fix it, to alleviate it. Certainly with respect to the emotions, it's just as important, because emotional needs are just as valid as physical needs. Okay, questions up to here. Okay, let me give you an example in Chumash. I have no authority for this. It occurred to me, I hope I'm right, of this kind of exquisite care for the other person's feelings. In this case, reciprocal. It's Avraham to Sarah and Sarah to Avram. Avram and Sarah come to Canaan, Eretz Yisrael. There's a famine. They go down to Egypt. On the way down to Egypt, Avram is concerned that if they appear in Egypt, the husband and wife, they'll kill him and take her captive, in the harem of one of the nobles. So he says to her, please say that you are my sister, so that I will live on account of you, and things will be good for me. That's what he says. Please say you're my sister, so that I'll live rather than being killed. He says they'll kill me and you they'll keep alive. Please say you're my sister, so that I'll live and things will be good with me. Okay, let me ask you a question. If the tragedy were to happen, and they kill Abraham, take Sarah, is that good or bad for Sarah? Is that a hard question? I hope not. It's terrible. She's going to be taken into the harem of some Egyptian nobleman. So Abraham could have said, listen, we're both in danger. We're both in danger. Let's do something smart that will save both of us from the danger. Let's say we're brother and sister. But that would mean that part of the plan that Abraham is proposing is for her sake. Now, if part of Abraham's plan is for her sake, she owes him gratitude. Abraham says, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to paint the whole thing as if it's just a favor for me. Not for her, just for me. Then if it's just a favor for me, she doesn't owe me anything. She's already doing a favor for me. And that way I relieve her of the burden of gratitude. I think that's exquisite. In terms of interpersonal relations, I think that's exquisite. Now, Sarah returns the compliment. Sarah says to Abraham, the passage starts like this. Sarah appreciated that she had not born a child for Abraham. What's going on in Sarah's mind? Not, I'm a woman and I'm not a mother. I don't have a child to care for, suckle the child, to raise a child. My life is empty and a tragedy. No. What's going on in her mind is, I haven't given a child to Abraham. Okay, that's already significant. So she says to Abraham, God has held me back from giving birth. She doesn't say, I didn't give you. She says, God has held me back from giving birth. Take my handmaid to wife and live with her. Perhaps I shall be built up through her. So how does she portray this to Abraham? She portrays it as Abraham's doing her a favor by building her up so that she can give birth. She doesn't say, listen, my only thought is you. I only care about you. I'm doing this all for the sake of providing you with an heir. Because then, if she does that, Abraham will owe her a vote of gratitude. She doesn't say that. Even though that's her kavanah, that's what she has in mind. But she says, do me a favor, that I'll be built up. And it says, Abraham obeyed Sarah's voice. Abraham did it because of Sarah's voice. I think you see exquisite dedication one to the other. Abraham, knowing that he doesn't have an heir, would never have dreamt of this. He didn't say to Sarah, I have to have an heir. And for those who know the text, it's 10 years in the land of Israel. You're allowed to. You have to have children. So he doesn't say a word. Not only doesn't he say a word, but when he does it for her. Does it for her. But her way of presenting it is a repeat of the way he presented the proposal on the way down to Egypt. That's exquisite care for the other person's feelings. Now, you can apply this in real life. Here's an example. You know somebody who's lacking self-confidence. I want to do something for him. I want to build him up. Now I'm going to tell you something which I think the entire secular world is ignorant of. I wrote an article about this, and I did some research on it. You can build a person up by making him a giver. Making him a giver. Put him in a position where he can give to others. That builds self-confidence. That builds self-esteem. I looked up websites on self-esteem, building self-esteem, preserving self-esteem. The idea of giving isn't mentioned. It's shocking. It's shocking. But take a simple example. So I'm thinking of this person who lacks self-confidence. And I know that he has good experience in a certain area. I go to him and I say, listen, I'm going to have to be involved in this area, and I don't know much about it. Could you please tell me something about it? Could you please, I'll tell you what my project is. Could you give me some advice about it? And he gives me the advice. Now, what's going on in this interaction? If I ask him for advice, I'm implying that he's knowledgeable, he's intelligent, he's articulate, he'll be able to describe to me in a way that'll be useful to me. I'm appealing to his generosity, which is a wonderful virtue. By the very fact of asking him for advice, I'm building him up. Much better than I say to him, why are you down on yourself? You're a terrific person, and so on and so on. No, I'm doing it by actual production. And he doesn't know I'm doing it in order to build him up. He doesn't know that. So I've relieved him from any burden of gratitude. He's giving me advice. He's really doing me a favor. And often this is really true. I may really need the advice. I may really be able to use the advice. But my intention was to build him up, and to build him up in such a way that he doesn't feel I'm doing him a favor. So to try to analyze an interaction in such a way that you can provide something for somebody without his knowing that you're providing it for him. Thinking that he's providing it for you, just as Abraham did for Sarah. And so for Abraham, I think it's an exquisite element in interpersonal relations, and it's a way that you can take care for the other person's psychological strength. At any rate, this is the general Torah attitude towards these matters. Let me share with you a letter of the Chazon Ish. In the collected letters, it's letter Lamed Hey 35. And some of these sources, by the way, I got from Zelig Pliskin, I should say. He put me onto the letter here, and the essay by the Telzer Shiva. I spoke with him about this 100 years ago. Now, all we have is the letters that the Chazon Ish wrote. They were responses to somebody who wrote to him, and we don't have the letters to him. But from what he wrote, you can figure out more or less what the question was. The question was, a yeshiva bacher wrote to him and said, I'm coming to the end of his man, and it was hard, and I worked hard, and I did well, and I'm exhausted, and now we're coming to Bein Hazmanim, the vacation period between the trimesters of the Jewish academic year. And he said, I know what people do. Go on vacation, go on trips, go to the beach, and so on and so on. But I don't know where it says in the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, that there's vacation time. Where is that? I don't know of any place where it says that. So I'm worried that by taking a vacation, I'm doing something wrong. I have no right to do that. He writes, this is my translation. Know, my dear one, that there is here no sin or guilt. It is the law of nature to become tired, and it is not appropriate to despise nature, for what we call nature is just the more constant aspect of Hashem's will. Chazon Ish was a deep philosopher. He's just throwing something in. It's the law of nature to get tired, because that's what happens to people. When they strain themselves physically or mentally or emotionally, they get tired. And he says getting tired is nature, and don't turn your back on nature. Don't resent nature. Nature is God's will. It's just a part of God's will that repeats itself and is constant. What we call miracles is a part of God's will that produces unique events. Therefore, the Chazon Ish goes on, you are obligated to stop learning entirely for 2 weeks and eat well, sleep more, travel, and other matters of batala. Now, in the yeshiva vocabulary, one of the strongest negative words is batala. Batala means killing time. It means doing nothing. And when the Chazon Ish writes that word into his letter, he knows that for a yeshiva bacher, that's a real slap in the face. 2 weeks of batala. 2 weeks of batala. And then he says, happy are you that you toiled in Torah and grew weak over it. People grow weak over various types of efforts. Happy are you. And then he says at the end of the letter, you wrote me Torah ideas in your letter. I'm not answering them. Understand? Because if he answers them, then it's going, oh, that's what he answered. What's the answer to the answer? And how do I work it out? No, I'm not answering. And then he says, and if you have trouble with this, come here and I'll take care of you. I'll make sure that you spend 2 weeks of Batala. That's amazing. That's amazing. Tell that to any yeshiva bacher. Now, I'll give you one last application of this, which I think is very important. One of the things that motivated me to work up this year. You have people who are in a position of taking care of others. People who are taking care of aged parents or siblings who have various disabilities. And they often are caught in a terrible guilt trap that I'm taking care of him, and no one can take care of this person as I can because I'm blood related to the person. If I hire a caretaker, even the caretaker's responsible and sensitive, it can't be. So how can I quit? How can I take off? I'm condemning this person that I'm caring for to second-rate care for the time that I take off. So they give themselves no break. And what they don't notice is that by giving themselves no break, they themselves are starting to deteriorate. Their ability to care for the loved one is starting to deteriorate. The truth is, as the Chazon Ish says, it is a law of nature that when you put out a strain and an effort, you get tired. And when you get tired, you start reaching your limits. So I say to such people, you must take off time. The love of the person you're caring for should dictate that you should take off time, because you'll serve that person better. The quality of care that you give will be better. And what's good for the person who needs care is not only the quantity of care, but the quality of care. You yourself are doing it full-time because you want it to be high quality, but you can't deliver. You can't deliver. So don't stay there, fail to deliver, then feel guilty and beat yourself up. Take off enough time to be renewed, rejuvenated, have strength, and come back and do the high-quality job that will renew itself, that will reinforce itself. When you're doing a high-quality job, you feel good about what you're doing, and that will reinforce you. But this is the general Torah attitude towards psychological needs. I think it's very, not appreciated enough. Any questions? No? Okay. Okay.